Timothy James McVeigh, April 23, 1968, June 11, 2001, was an American domestic terrorist who carried out the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people and injured more than 680 others and destroyed one-third of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. The bombing was the second deadliest act of terrorism in the United States other than the Tulsa Race Massacre prior to the September 11 attacks. It remains one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. A Gulf War veteran, McVeigh sought revenge against the federal government for the 1993 Waco siege that ended in the deaths of 86 people, many of whom were children, as well as the 1992 Ruby Ridge incident and American foreign policy. He hoped to inspire a revolution against the federal government and defended the bombing as a legitimate tactic against what he saw as tyrannical government. He was arrested shortly after the bombing and indicted on 160 state offenses and 11 federal offenses, including the use of a weapon of mass destruction. He was found guilty on all counts in 1997 and sentenced to death. McVeigh was executed by lethal injection on June 11, 2001, at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. His execution was carried out in a considerably shorter time than most inmates awaiting the death penalty. Terry Nichols and Michael Fortier were convicted as conspirators in the plot. Nichols was sentenced to 8 life terms for the deaths of 8 federal agents, and to 161 life terms without parole by the state of Oklahoma for the deaths of the others. Michael Fortier was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment and has since been released. Lori Fortier was given immunity in exchange for her testimony against the others. McVeigh was born on April 23, 1968, in Lockport, New York, the only son and the second of 3 children of Irish-Americans Mildred Mickey Noreen, née Hill, and William McVeigh. In 1866, McVeigh's great-great-grandfather Edward McVeigh emigrated from Ireland and settled in Niagara County. After their parents divorced when McVeigh was 10 years old, he was raised by his father in Pendleton, New York. McVeigh claimed to have been a target of bullying at school, and he took refuge in a fantasy world where he imagined retaliating against the bullies. At the end of his life, he stated his belief that the United States government is the ultimate bully. Most who knew McVeigh remember him as being very shy and withdrawn, while a few described him as an outgoing and playful child who withdrew as an adolescent. He is said to have had only one girlfriend as an adolescent. He later told journalists that he did not have any idea how to impress girls. While in high school, McVeigh became interested in computers and hacked into government computer systems on his Commodore 64 under the handle The Wanderer, taken from the song by Dion DiMucci. In his senior year, he was named Most Promising Computer Programmer of Star Point Central High School but had relatively poor grades until his 1986 graduation. He was introduced to firearms by his grandfather. McVeigh told people of his wish to become a gun shop owner, and sometimes took firearms to school to impress his classmates. He became intensely interested in gun rights as well as the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution after he graduated from high school, and read magazines such as Soldier of Fortune. He briefly attended Bryant and Stratton College before dropping out. After dropping out of college, McVeigh worked as an armored car guard and was noted by co-workers as being obsessed with guns. One co-worker recalled an instance when McVeigh came to work looking like Pancho Villa as he was wearing bandoliers. In May 1988, at the age of 20, McVeigh enlisted in the United States Army and attended basic training and advanced individual training at the U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia. While in the military, McVeigh used much of his spare time to read about firearms, sniper tactics, and explosives. McVeigh was reprimanded by the military for purchasing a White Power t-shirt at a Ku Klux Klan protest. They were objecting to black servicemen who wore Black Power t-shirts around a military installation, primarily Army. McVeigh was a top-scoring gunner with the 25mm cannon of the Bradley fighting vehicles used by the 1st Infantry Division and was promoted to sergeant. After being promoted, McVeigh earned a reputation for assigning undesirable work to black servicemen and using racial slurs. He was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas, before being deployed on Operation Desert Storm. In an interview before his execution, McVeigh said that he decapitated an Iraqi soldier with cannon fire on his first day in the war and celebrated. He said he was later shocked to be ordered to execute surrendering prisoners and to see carnage on the road while leaving Kuwait City after U.S. troops routed the Iraqi army. McVeigh received several service awards, including the Bronze Star Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Southwest Asia Service Medal, Army Service Ribbon, and the Kuwaiti Liberation Medal. McVeigh aspired to join the United States Army Special Forces, SF. After returning from the Gulf War, he entered the selection program but washed out on the second day of the 21-day assessment and selection course for the Special Forces. McVeigh decided to leave the Army and was honorably discharged in 1991. Post-military life. McVeigh wrote letters to local newspapers complaining about taxes. Taxes are a joke. Regardless of what a political candidate promises, they will increase. More taxes are always the answer to government mismanagement. They mess up. We suffer. Taxes are reaching cataclysmic levels, with no slowdown in sight. Is a civil war imminent? Do we have to shed blood to reform the current system? I hope it doesn't come to that. But it might. McVeigh also wrote to Representative John J. LaFalce, D. New York, complaining about the arrest of a woman for carrying mace. It is a lie if we tell ourselves that the police can protect us everywhere at all times. Firearms restrictions are bad enough, but now a woman can't even carry mace in her purse. While visiting friends in Decker, Michigan, McVeigh reportedly complained that the Army had implanted a microchip into his buttocks so that the government could keep track of him. McVeigh worked long hours in a dead-end job and felt that he did not have a home. He sought romance, but his advances were rejected by a co-worker and he felt nervous around women. He believed that he brought too much pain to his loved ones. He grew angry and frustrated at his difficulties in finding a girlfriend. He took up obsessive gambling. Unable to pay gambling debts, he took a cash advance and then defaulted on his repayments. He began looking for a state so that he could live without heavy government regulation or high taxes. He became enraged when the government told him that he had been overpaid $1,058 while in the Army and he had to pay back the money. He wrote an angry letter to the government, saying, "Go ahead, take everything I own, take my dignity. Feel good as you grow fat and rich at my expense, sucking my tax dollars and property." McVeigh introduced his sister to anti-government literature, but his father had little interest in these views. He moved out of his father's house and into an apartment that had no telephone. This made it impossible for his employer to contact him for overtime assignments. He quit the National Rifle Association, NRA, believing that it was too weak on gun rights. In 1993, McVeigh drove to Waco, Texas, during the Waco siege to show his support. At the scene, he distributed pro-gun rights literature and bumper stickers bearing slogans such as, "When guns are outlawed, I will become an outlaw." He told a student reporter, "The government is afraid of the guns people have because they have to have control of the people at all times. Once you take away the guns, you can do anything to the people. You give them an inch and they take a mile. I believe we are slowly turning into a socialist government. The government is continually growing bigger and more powerful, and the people need to prepare to defend themselves against government control." For the 5 months following the Waco siege, McVeigh worked at gun shows and handed out free cards printed with Lon Horiuchi's name and address, in the hope that somebody in the Patriot movement would assassinate the sharpshooter. Horiuchi is an FBI sniper and some of his official actions have drawn controversy, specifically his shooting and killing of Randy Weaver's wife while she held an infant child. McVeigh wrote hate mail to Horiuchi, suggesting that what goes around, comes around. McVeigh later considered putting aside his plan to target the Murrah Building to target Horiuchi or a member of his family instead. McVeigh became a fixture on the gun show circuit, traveling to 40 states and visiting about 80 gun shows. He found that the further west he went, the more anti-government sentiment he encountered, at least until he got to what he called the People's Socialist Republic of California. McVeigh sold survival items and copies of the Turner Diaries. One author said, "In the gun show culture, McVeigh found a home. Though he remained skeptical of some of the most extreme ideas being bandied around, he liked talking to people there about the United Nations, the federal government, and possible threats to American liberty." McVeigh had a road atlas with hand-drawn designations of the most likely places for nuclear attacks and considered buying property in Seligman, Arizona, which he determined to be in a nuclear-free zone. He lived with Michael Fortier in Kingman, Arizona, and the two became so close that he served as best man at Fortier's wedding. McVeigh experimented with cannabis and methamphetamine after first researching their effects in an encyclopedia. He was never as interested in drugs as Fortier was, and one of the reasons they parted ways was McVeigh's getting tired of Fortier's drug habits. In April 1993, McVeigh headed for a farm in Michigan where former roommate Terry Nichols lived. In between watching coverage of the Waco siege on TV, Nichols and his brother began teaching McVeigh how to make explosives by combining household chemicals in plastic jugs. The destruction of the Waco compound enraged McVeigh and convinced him that it was time to take action. He was particularly angered by the government's use of CS gas on women and children. He had been exposed to the gas as part of his military training and was familiar with its effects. The disappearance of certain evidence, such as the bullet-riddled steel-reinforced front door to the complex, led him to suspect a cover-up. McVeigh's anti-government rhetoric became more radical. He began to sell Bureau of Alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, ATF, hats riddled with bullet holes, and a flare gun that he said could shoot down an ATF helicopter. He produced videos detailing the government's actions at Waco and handed out pamphlets with titles such as U.S. Government Initiates Open Warfare Against American People and Waco Shootout Evokes Memory of Warsaw 43. He began changing his answering machine greeting every couple of weeks to various quotes by Patrick Henry, such as "Give me liberty or give me death." He began experimenting with making pipe bombs and other small explosive devices. The government imposed new firearms restrictions in 1994 which McVeigh believed threatened his livelihood. McVeigh dissociated himself from his boyhood friend Steve Hodge by sending him a 23-page farewell letter. He proclaimed his devotion to the United States Declaration of Independence, explaining in detail what each sentence meant to him. McVeigh declared that those who betray or subvert the Constitution are guilty of sedition and/or treason, are domestic enemies, and should and will be punished accordingly. It also stands to reason that anyone who sympathizes with the enemy or gives aid or comfort to said enemy is likewise guilty. I have sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will. And I will because not only did I swear to, but I believe in what it stands for in every bit of my heart, soul, and being. I know in my heart that I am right in my struggle, Steve. I have come to peace with myself, my God, and my cause. Blood will flow in the streets, Steve. Good versus evil. Free men versus socialist wannabe slaves. Pray it is not your blood, my friend. McVeigh felt the need to personally reconnoiter sites of rumored conspiracies. He visited Area 51 in order to defy government restrictions on photography and went to Gulfport, Mississippi, to determine the veracity of rumors about United Nations operations. These turned out to be false. The Russian vehicles on the site were being configured for use in UN-sponsored humanitarian aid efforts. Around this time, McVeigh and Nichols began making bulk purchases of ammonium nitrate, an agricultural fertilizer, for resale to survivalists, since rumors were circulating that the government was preparing to ban it. McVeigh told Fortier of his plans to blow up a federal building, but Fortier declined to participate. Fortier also told his wife about the plans. McVeigh composed 2 letters to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the first titled Constitutional Defenders and the second ATF Read. He denounced government officials as fascist tyrants and stormtroopers, and warned, "ATF, all you tyrannical motherfuckers will swing in the wind one day for your treasonous actions against the Constitution of the United States. Remember the Nuremberg war trials." McVeigh also wrote a letter to recruit a customer named Steve Colbring. A man with nothing left to lose is a very dangerous man, and his anger can be focused toward a common, righteous goal. What I'm asking you to do, then, is sit back and be honest with yourself. Do you have kids, a wife? Would you back out at the last minute to care for the family? Are you interested in keeping your firearms for their current, future monetary value, or would you drag that 06 through rock, swamp, and cactus to get off the needed shot? In short, I'm not looking for talkers, I'm looking for fighters. And if you are a Fed, think twice. Think twice about the Constitution you are supposedly enforcing. Isn't enforcing freedom an oxymoron? And think twice about catching us with our guard down. You will lose just like Deegan did, and your family will lose. McVeigh began announcing that he had progressed from the propaganda phase to the action phase. He wrote to his Michigan friend Gwenda Strider, "I have certain other militant talents that are in short supply and greatly demanded." McVeigh later said he considered a campaign of individual assassination, with eligible targets including Attorney General Janet Reno, Judge Walter S. Smith Jr. of Federal District Court, who handled the Branch Davidian trial, and Lon Horiuchi, a member of the FBI hostage rescue team, who shot and killed Vicki Weaver in a standoff at a remote cabin at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, in 1992. He said he wanted Reno to accept full responsibility in deed, not just words. Such an assassination seemed too difficult, and he decided that since federal agents had become the soldiers, he should strike at them at their command centers. According to McVeigh's authorized biography, he decided that he could make the loudest statement by bombing a federal building. After the bombing, he was ambivalent about his act and the deaths he caused. As he said in letters to his hometown newspaper, he sometimes wished that he had carried out a series of assassinations against police and government officials instead. Working at a lakeside campground near McVeigh's old Army post, he and Nichols constructed an info-explosive device mounted in the back of a rented Ryder truck. The bomb consisted of about 5,000 pounds, 2,300 kilograms, of ammonium nitrate and nitromethane. On April 19, 1995, McVeigh drove the truck to the front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building just as its offices opened for the day. Before arriving, he stopped to light a 2-minute fuse. At 9:02, a large explosion destroyed the north half of the building. It killed 168 people, including 19 children in the daycare center on the second floor, and injured 684 others. McVeigh said that he had not known that there was a daycare center on the second floor and that he might have chosen a different target if he had known about it. Nichols said that he and McVeigh did know about the daycare center in the building and that they did not care. McVeigh's biographers, Lou Michel and Dan Herbeck, spoke with McVeigh in interviews totaling 75 hours. He said about the victims, "To these people in Oklahoma who have lost a loved one, I'm sorry, but it happens every day. You're not the first mother to lose a kid, or the first grandparent to lose a grandson or a granddaughter. It happens every day, somewhere in the world. I'm not going to go into that courtroom, curl into a fetal ball and cry just because the victims want me to do that." During an interview in 2000 with Ed Bradley for television news magazine 60 Minutes, Bradley asked McVeigh for his reaction to the deaths of the 19 children. McVeigh said, "I thought it was terrible that there were children in the building." According to the Oklahoma City Memorial Institute for the Prevention of Terrorism, MIPT, more than 300 buildings in the city were damaged. More than 12,000 volunteers and rescue workers took part in the rescue, recovery, and support operations following the bombing. In reference to theories that McVeigh had assistance from others, he responded with a well-known line from the film A Few Good Men, "You can't handle the truth." He added, "Because the truth is, I blew up the Murrah Building, and isn't it kind of scary that one man could wreak this kind of hell?" McVeigh's death sentence was delayed pending an appeal. One of his appeals for certiorari, taken to the Supreme Court of the United States, was denied on March 8, 1999. McVeigh's request for a nationally televised execution was also denied. An internet company unsuccessfully sued for the right to broadcast the execution. At USP Florence and Mex, McVeigh and Nichols were housed in what was known as Bombers Row. Ted Kaczynski, Luis Felipe, and Ramzi Youssef were also housed in this cell block. Youssef made frequent, unsuccessful attempts to convert McVeigh to Islam. McVeigh said, "I am sorry these people had to lose their lives, but that's the nature of the beast. It's understood going in what the human toll will be." He said that if there turned out to be an afterlife, he would improvise, adapt and overcome, noting, "If there is a hell, then I'll be in good company with a lot of fighter pilots who also had to bomb innocents to win the war." He also said, "I knew I wanted this before it happened. I knew my objective was state-assisted suicide, and when it happens, it's in your face. You just did something you're trying to say should be illegal for medical personnel." The Federal Bureau of Prisons, BOP, transferred McVeigh from USP Florence and Mex to the federal death row at USP Terre Haute in Terre Haute, Indiana, in 1999. McVeigh dropped his remaining appeals, saying that he would rather die than spend the rest of his life in prison. On January 16, 2001, the BOP set May 16 as McVeigh's execution date. McVeigh said that his only regret was not completely destroying the federal building. 6 days prior to his scheduled execution, the FBI turned over thousands of documents of evidence it had previously withheld to McVeigh's attorneys. As a result, U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft announced McVeigh's execution would stay for 1 month. The execution date was reset for June 11. McVeigh invited conductor David Woodard to perform Requiem Mass music on the eve of his execution. While acknowledging McVeigh's horrible deed, Woodard consented, intending to provide comfort. McVeigh also requested a Catholic chaplain. His last meal consisted of 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. McVeigh chose William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus as his final statement. Just before the execution, when he was asked if he had a final statement, he declined. J. Sawyer, a relative of one of the victims, wrote, "Without saying a word, he got the final word." Larry Witcher, whose brother died in the attack, described McVeigh as having a totally expressionless, blank stare. He had a look of defiance and that if he could, he'd do it all over again. McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at 7:14 a.m. on June 11, 2001, the first federal prisoner to be executed since Victor Feguer was executed in Iowa on March 15, 1963. On November 21, 1997, President Bill Clinton had signed S. 923, special legislation introduced by Senator Arlen Specter to bar McVeigh and other veterans convicted of capital crimes from being buried in any military cemetery. His body was cremated at Maddox Ryan Funeral Home in Terre Haute. His ashes were given to his lawyer, who said that the final destination of McVeigh's remains would remain privileged forever. McVeigh had written that he considered having them dropped at the site of the memorial where the building once stood, but decided that would be too vengeful, too raw, too cold. He had expressed willingness to donate organs but was prohibited from doing so by prison regulations. Psychiatrist John Smith concluded that McVeigh was a decent person who had allowed rage to build up inside him to the point that he had lashed out in one terrible, violent act. McVeigh's IQ was assessed at 126.